The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your hosts, Dr. Dean Bertram and Jen Durrell.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network. I'm your host, Dean Bertram, and here in the Northwoods, spring has truly sprung. It was a beautiful day here today, which gives myself and my 7-year-old daughter the opportunity to wander around our woods a little less or a little easier than it is in the winter when it's, knee deep sometimes. And to find all the markings, of course, that the animals have left and the chew marks on trees and the claw marks and the like. And thanks to author Chad Lewis, who gifted my daughter his book on Legends of the North Woods last summer, when we find these scratches, she's like, that's the hide behind doing those scratches. Or see that limb broken up there? That's a splinter cat broke that down. I guess she could have said Bigfoot as well, but she's more familiar with that book even than with Bigfoot. Anyway, it's going to be a fun show tonight. I have a very good friend joining me. I've known tonight's guest from way back towards the end of my PhD candidature. In fact, on the day I graduated from my PhD, which was obviously exciting and a big party, what was equally exciting for me was a short film that I'd made was playing at his film festival, which he used to run near Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It came from Lake Michigan was the name of the festival. I remember being super excited. I obviously couldn't come. A, I just finished my PhD, so I was a poor student, and B, I was graduating. But it's weird how the world works. I never thought then I would be living in Wisconsin when I screened a film there. Anyway, we kept contact over the years, and he's a filmmaker himself. He also founded Indie Film Wisconsin, and he's written several books. One of his most recent books is called UFO CULTS, Watch the Skies. And so we both share a keen interest in new religious groups which have the idea of UFOs or the belief in UFOs as a part of their theology. So I thought that might be a fun jumping off point for tonight's discussion. So I'm delighted to welcome to the show my very dear friend, Mr. Wayne Clingman, also known as Mr. Big. How are you, Wayne?
I'm really good, sir. About yourself?
Well, I'm super excited to get to talk to you. I haven't had you on the show for a while. We haven't had you on since we moved to Untold Radio, I don't think.
No, sir. This is my first time here. And again, I thank you a great deal, sir.
Oh, well, it's great to have you here. I'm so happy to see some of our regulars in the chat as well. Just quickly say hello to Ken Mrock and say hello to the Beatron, who I'm not as familiar with, but he says he loves the show, or she says she loves the show. I think it's a he in that little profile pic. And of course, Ed Schultz, who was a guest of mine on this week's Mysterious Library when Jason McLean was unable to join us because of a family medical issue, but I think everything's going well there. So Jason should be back on this coming week's Mysterious Library. So Wayne, what have you been up to? I know the most recent book I talked to you about. I think I might have talked to you since the UFO book, because you have books coming out all the time. You're prolific in your writing.
There's reasons why I can do that, and I'm very, very happy I've been able to do so. We're doing a series of books on the Buffalo, New York Mafia under the title Buffalo Mob. When the first volume came out this year, a few months ago, and we have more coming out. But it's interesting to bring this up because it kind of goes in the UFO cults, because I've heard of something called Motac. I probably mispronouncing it. Motac or whatever. New York, it's in Long Island.
Yeah, Motac or Motac. Yeah. I don't know how to pronounce it either, to be honest.
I thought the UFO cults I talked about were some crazy, way out there people. That's a whole level of crazy.
Tell me a little bit about what you've been researching about Motac.
Well, what I've been listening to is podcasts. I'm absolutely convinced that underneath that structure is a huge government complex. And they're absolutely convinced it exists. And obviously there's time travel going on there. Some guy went back to talk to Jesus on the cross. There's a lot that's going on there. UFOs come and go like there's no tomorrow. It's all in my opinion, it's all your different UFO conspiracies all in one convenient place in New York State, of all places.
That's related somehow to the Philadelphia experiment. Isn't there some?
Yes.
I know I'm not that au fait with it. I know the person who popularized the Philadelphia experiment, I believe, was Charles Berlitz. Didn't he write a book on the Philadelphia experience?
He, among others, yes.
And then he later wrote the book with William Moore in the late 70s, early 80s on Roswell, the first Roswell book. Like the UFO community had forgotten about Roswell since 1947 when it happened. And it was William Moore's and Charles Berlitz's book on Roswell, which reignited the interest. And interestingly, talking about underground bases, of course, William Moore was part of the Paul Benowitz affair as well, which popularized much of the belief system around the idea of there being an underground base in Dulce, New Mexico. So it's fascinating to trace these strains to particular authors and through particular.
Absolutely. And then somebody we both know, John Keel, wrote in his books that these things, let's call them myths, tend to spread. They tend to link to one another. So the more weird things out there, the more they can say, I read this in this book. Here's my book on the subject. Someone else comes by and says, oh, Wayne wrote about this. Dean wrote about this. My God, there must be something to it.
Yeah, of course, at the moment, as everybody who listens to this show, I always joke about, they're probably getting sick of me talking about it, but it's my primary research and just passion at the moment outside of obviously just raising my daughter and doing these shows. What I spend most of my time thinking about is Ray Palmer and Richard Shaver and the Shaver mystery. And of course, prior even to the advent of the modern flying saucers in the mid-1940s, before 1947, the Shaver mystery introduced this idea of secret, cavernous, subterranean regions where ET type creatures dwelt right near us and sometimes kidnapped us and interfered with us and had advanced technology. So again, these strains run throughout, and you see similar ideas popping up about ancient civilizations later in Eric von Daniken, which now is popularized through shows like Ancient Aliens. So there's very little under the sun. And of course, you can trace these ideas back further and further and further, and before you know it, you're in biblical texts or pre-biblical texts. And I think that's what's interesting about UFO cults, which I know is going to be our jumping off point, your book, is that it seems to me that a lot of the belief systems underpinning these UFO groups, UFO new religious groups, which I talked a little bit about Eli Watson on the show last week about as well, is that they often have well-known esoteric or occult or religious beliefs, and the science fiction aspects of UFO lore just seem to get wrapped around beliefs which sometimes are hundreds or thousands of years old. Is that something you kind of bumped into in your studies as well?
Not so much. My stuff kind of goes into the weirdest conspiracy theories. I mean, that's why my mind is set, because I'm a big believer in conspiracy theories. I do love reading about them, and sometimes I might think I read too much about them, but that is what it is. I just find it whole fascinating that people tend to gravitate towards these things in times of great stress, which we're going into now. I'm shocked that we're not seeing more sightings. At least ones I'm not reading about them as much as I thought I would be in the paper or seeing about them on TV. I don't know. I mean, I'm shocked that's not going on, but more and more cults are coming to the service. Not much I've heard. Not much I've read. A lot more information about cults.
Yeah, I'm careful not to talk about politics on this show because A, it's a family show, and B, the network isn't a political network. But without going into specifics, I wonder if some of that lack of the emergence of stranger conspiracy theories, like new UFO conspiracy theories, although they're certainly still there, is because both sides of the political aisle have their own conspiracy theories these days, which are often so wild and crazy without taking sides that you almost don't even need to open a UFO book to read things which are just bonkers. You can just turn on the TV or listen to whatever you listen to, and someone's going to have a conspiracy theory today.
Yes. My neighbors have conspiracy theories.
Oh, I'm sure. It isn't 1960s anymore where there was, Eisenhower and Kennedy and everything seemed, I'm talking about pre the Kennedy assassination. Right. Everything seemed kind of, if you wanted to find out their conspiracy theories, you had to dig for them. They weren't on the mainstream news, or they weren't on the talk radio that you listen to. Today, you don't have to dig for these theories.
I mean, interesting thing is because I like researching them because sometimes there's a gem of truth to them, right? And you know, and reading about them educates me about what we don't know. I mean, think about Iran Contra. I mean, all that stuff goes really deep and early. You know, think about what happened in the state of Arkansas, in the airport, Menina, and those poor teenagers that were killed at railroad track. That's all documented, right? Nobody has ever explored that as much as they should have, but it is what it is, right? For whatever reason, these things occur. The idea that my neighbors from Mexico are talking about their conspiracy theories with me, an American, right? And sometimes that's the only thing we have in common is we talk about, I won't be able to pronounce the animal's name correctly, but the I mispronounced that so badly. You know, the dog ape thing? So it's the letter C.
Oh, the chupacabra.
Yeah, thank you. My after my strokes, I don't talk with a damn.
The goats.
You talk about that with me for hours.
Yeah. It's interesting, though, that sometimes it is, I don't know, it's something which Colin Bennett wrote about in, I'm trying to think what book it was, if it was his book Waiting for Orthon, or if it was his book on American demonology, or his book on Charles Fort. Anyway, in one of his books, he spoke about how just as the JFK assassination and the resulting Warren Commission report kind of was a leaping off point for a lot of people to look into darker areas and lose trust in the government establishment. In UFO circles, it was the Condon Committee and that report, which led a lot of ufology to jump off and be super suspicious of mainstream explanations for the UFO phenomenon. And we do see, I guess we see more it isn't that the UFO community wasn't already talking about ideas like the US Air Force might be covering up what they know about UFOs prior to 1969, prior to the University of Colorado report, which, for people who don't know, were essentially under congressional pressure. The United States Air Force handed over the study of UFOs to supposedly public or a non-governmental, non-military organization or study, which was done by the University of Colorado. They're the people who took the bid, and then that study, which was released in 1969, or the report, essentially said, there's nothing here. The US government doesn't have to worry about investigating UFOs anymore. There were a lot, without going into the details, there was a lot of controversy, which was legitimate, surrounding that. There was certainly people within that study who were motivated by trying to retain respectability and not wanting to look like UFO kooks, and how much of that was conspiratorial and how much of that is just can be explained sociologically by the nature of an academic organization. I mean, we could discuss that till the cows come home, but certainly that result, knowing that the US government wasn't going to be looking at UFO reports properly anymore, supposedly, and knowing that a major academic scientific institution had said there was nothing here, kind of left the only way open for UFO believers or UFO researchers to do it outside of the academy, really, and to do it outside of the government. And as a result, you get an increase in interest in things like alien abduction, an increase in conspiracy theory. You get a whole wing of ufology, probably spearheaded by John Keel and particularly Jacques Vallée, after the Condon Committee, which essentially threw science overboard. The book that Jacques Vallée, who was one of the premier and still is one of the premier thinkers in the UFO field, at the time he had been sympathetic to the extraterrestrial hypothesis. After Condon, he was a scientist himself. He threw science overboard and wrote the book called Passport to Magonia in 1969, where he essentially said science can't deal with this. Hey, it looks like it could be the same as occult and fairy traditions anyway, so let's look in non-scientific avenues to maybe understand this phenomenon. And that obviously still is a major wing of UFO thinking today. So this can be traced back to, again, a lack of trust in a government institution. So it's interesting to see how these strains develop and how.
And they go on and go on. And you mentioned the fairy tradition, right? I mean, I live in Wisconsin. I live in an old house. It's really, really old. It's like over 100 years old and then some, right? And we live near Indian Mountains. In fact, my home may have been built on one. We think kind of sort of, right? And we have a puck. I have to physically carry my phone in my pocket or put it in my drawer in front of me. If I put it on any flat surface at all in this room, it will fly across the room.
Goodness. So tell us about your puck. Like a puck's a fairy, right? Or
Right,
one of the
Puck's a
fair
fairy.
folk.
Our fairy is about 6 inches, 8 inches tall. It wears brown. And it doesn't like my phone. I don't know why.
So have you physically have you seen?
I think I've seen the Puck. My daughter, who's now, I think when he's in her is 31, 32, she used to see it upstairs. She had a mobile that would spin around, and sometimes the Puck would spin around at her at night. It got to the point where her friends wouldn't come to stay overnight with her anymore because they got terrified about what was that spinning that wheel around. It's something the family talks about from time to time. We have the cabinet you can see behind me. We have on the other side of the wall another one that's heavier, right? And one day, it had two sections like that one is behind me. And one day, the top section not flew across the room, but jumped across the panel it was on about 2 feet, smashed all the plates inside. It's probably several hundred pounds.
Good grief. I think you told me back in the day about that, and you said you were going to get a paranormal team in to see what was going on.
No disrespect meant from the paranormal team we have in Racine, Wisconsin area. They have lives and things happen to them, and they can't necessarily respond as quickly as you would like them to. We're waiting patiently to see what happens. I don't have respect for them and what they're trying to do. But again, they got lives, they have jobs, they have things they have to do first.
So tell me how you deal with the Puck on a day-to-day. Do you leave offerings out and things?
Leave offerings, milk and cookies. Milk and cookies. We have an oak tree in front of my front yard. We planted it as an acorn. Basically as an acorn. We named it after my friend who died tragically in an automobile accident. A couple times a year, I give it a can of beer. When I do that, the Puck activity stops. When we give him the beer, we believe out milk and cookies, the Puck activity stops.
Does it do anything like a house brownie? Does it do any good things for you, or does it just mischievous?
Not to my knowledge, but then we've not asked it to either. We're not put out anything broken and say, hey, can mend this to us, right? I'm happy that it only plays with my cell phone, not do anything more destructive.
I know you have animals, dogs and cats there. Do they ever react to it, or
no? We get no reaction from the pets. Though we did the old trick of looking through the cat's ears to see if we can see it. It's an old wives' tale. And
I don't know that trick. Tell me that trick. I never heard of that.
If you have a cat, supposedly if you have a cat, you can look. The cat here, one ear, 2 ear, look through the ears, and you can see pucks, brownies, ghosts, whatever. It's an old wives' tale.
Gosh, my cat, funnily enough, is called Valet. We were talking about Jacques Valet, named after him. Tomorrow, I might grab Valet and walk around my property.
Good, good. I mean, back when I was younger, I used to be. My wife ran an animal hospital in Milwaukee, and they called me up to do tarot readings, right? And they also used me as a consultant because they had a ghost in the original building that the practice was in. So I showed them how a spirit jar worked and how they use a spirit jar to catch their ghost and get rid of it.
You got to tell me about a spirit jar. See, I'm not Mr. Paranormal. I don't know about spirit jars. How does a spirit jar work?
Well, a spirit jar is a family secret that I'm not going to divulge in the show because it's a side hustle too, with no disrespect for side hustles, right? But spirit jars can be used to get away take away the whatever you might want to call it that may be giving you a hard time. I mean, I've been called in. My wife had a coworker who was troubled with an ex-boyfriend. So I told her a couple of simple things that she could do to make the ex-boyfriend go away. And she did them and he went away. Now, was it because he saw the signs that made him think, my gosh, she's a crazy loon, I'm getting the hell out of here? Was the fact that these signs magically protected her? Don't know, don't care. The idea is that she used these things. It helped her in the time that she needed that assistance. I'm a happy camper.
So, okay, you can't give away the secrets of the spirit jar, but is the concept that it traps it in it the same way a Ghostbuster in the film would trap the ghost in a trap or something, and you can carry it away then, or?
Yeah, it's basically you give it something else to go into, and once it goes in, it won't get out. It gets busy.
Huh. Is it like Christ driving the spirits into the pigs and then they go off the cliff, or?
No, more like I can't remember the vampire that counts the poppy seeds.
Ah, yeah, I know that. That fairy tale or that legend. Yeah, gotcha. Fascinating. Yeah. So tell me, we kind of We went in a very interesting direction then. Geez, I love chatting to you, Wayne, because it goes in these places. What's your okay? So you have a park, and so obviously you're sympathetic to fairy faith, as am I. And we were talking about Verlaine and his type of interpretations about UFO lore and how some of these manifestations and experiences seem to be common to older folkloric traditions, including fairy faith. Do you look at the UFO phenomenon like that, or aspects of it like that?
I don't know how I look at that anymore because it frankly blows me away because we have those UAPs are now called, right, which people see all the time. And some people think they're American, and some people think they're Russian or Chinese, right? Well, the Russians would have taken over Ukraine, right? Superior Report, they would have taken over Ukraine. It was ours. Well, the Russians wouldn't be in Ukraine anymore. So it's not ours, it's not the Russians. What are they? Don't know. There was a podcast on something called The Hidden Truth, where the host of that show brought on a physicist who went into long detail. He thought they were from the future. And he didn't know why they were here, but they're from the future. And he thought that we were working on the technology to create them that was in our past ability to make these things ourselves. But he thought they're definitely from the future.
I mean, I wonder if they're futuristic in the sense that they're early generation testing of this type of stuff. So maybe we don't have enough to weaponize it to go and do something significant with it, but maybe we have enough to go, okay, let's test how this thing does when it's in a situation with Navy pilots. Or maybe it's let's see how pilots react when we can throw something up there that behaves anomalously. That's my type of interpretation of it, that maybe this is some type of test, or even maybe whether it's a psyop on the Navy pilots themselves, or whether it's a psyop on the Russians, or whether it's a psyop on the US public, or a psyop on everybody. I don't know, but I've always suspected there was some type of spin attached to it, and there was broader significance than just, okay, this thing
I think that's going on as well. I mean, we simply don't know what we don't know. Look at Area 51. Look at when they were testing the early stealth planes, right? People look at it, must be a UFO. No, it wasn't a UFO. It was a stealth plane.
Oh, yeah, there's a long history of that in America.
Yeah, I mean, if I was testing something that advanced, I'd try different things too. And if the public was curious, well, I could Congress investigate it. I'd say, hey, Congress, hey, Senator Reid, yeah, we remember you and how you used to work with the mafia. Have a couple $1 million and set up some group to go and study these UFOs, right? Yeah, I would do the same thing.
Well, I mean, the black budgets are so big and money just gets lost. It's like, where did those billions go? We don't know. So I know they go to places like, I suspect they go to places like this. They go to places like, and it makes sense. I mean, this money isn't just being, spent on trips to, vacations for the agents to go to the Bahamas. This money's being funneled into projects you and I honestly think can't even dream about. But I think some of it.
Here you go. As you know, I write books about Las Vegas, the mafia in Las Vegas, right? And as you know, I just wrote a book about the skim, right? And card counting, all that other good stuff. And there's people who there are people who teach you how you can control dice for craps games. And people laugh and giggle, oh, you're nuts. You can't do that, right? But you have to remember that MKUltra spent millions and millions of dollars on people trying to psychically control physical objects. So they wouldn't spend that much money for that long. I think it was like the tens of millions. How to control physical objects, there wasn't something to it.
Well, there's that movie, The Men Who Stare at Goats, based on the book of the same title, which deals with that type of project.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's millions of dollars spent once the West found out that the Russians were studying what they call psi as a weaponization. We spent money on it too, and who knows what they found out, if anything, right? When soapbox time, to think that Whitey Bulger, who's a criminal beyond compare, he's a murderer. He killed lots of people, right? We know this, right? Yes, it is. Stargate is alive well, Mr. Schultz. He killed lots of people, but before he started killing, he was in prison, and before he went to prison, he was a criminal, but not a vicious criminal. Then in prison, he was tested by MKUltra, by the CIA, gave him drugs. When he got out of prison, he became a killer. Does those drugs make him a killer? Don't know. Why don't we know? Well, in one of his appeals, he attempted to get his own medical records, and they're classified as top secrets. What? What? The guy's in trial for his life, and you won't let him have his own medical records? What did you do to this poor guy? Same thing with Walter Bomber. You know, I mean,
Yeah, again, I'll use popular culture references because I'm probably more familiar with the popular culture of this than some of the actual conspiracy theories. But this is Manchurian Candidate type stuff as well, like
yeah,
the old Sinatra movie and then the Denzel Washington remake. The idea that there are forces or there are agencies or there are whatever who have a vested interest in seeing if they can't control behavior in people.
absolutely. I mean, I can understand why you want to control behavior. I understand the theory behind it. I understand why people might want to do it. It terrifies me to think that our government might have done it or did do it one time. It terrifies me the fact that they would dose with LSD and other drugs Americans without their knowledge. It terrifies me that they would dose and test prisoners without necessarily their knowledge. Now, maybe, mind you, the guy that killed some kid or whatever really don't care. But what's the difference between that and, say, me or you?
Yeah, it's terrifying. Let's go back to
UFOs, yes.
the more fun weird. No, let's answer Ed Schultz's question. I'm not as down with Project Stargate. I've heard about it, but you seem quite confident that this thing's still going. Can you talk a little bit about Stargate?
I can't go into a lot of detail because I don't know the details. I just hear other people talk about Stargate. There's going on and doing the studies and the research necessary to make that all happen. All part of the UFO studies and the like. What's the troubling thing is that the big fight, I'm so bad with names tonight. I'm sorry. Lazar, they're trying to figure out if it was going on with him, what was legit, what's not.
Bob Lazar.
Yeah. I mean, people still fighting about that, are they not?
Well, yeah, Lazar's always a contentious figure. We talked a little bit about him last week on the show as well. I'd point people at a documentary that they can watch for free, which is only a 30-minute doco. It's great, though, called The Conspiratologist, which is about the Japanese-American UFO researcher and conspiracy researcher, conspiratologist as he calls himself, Norio Hayakawa, who has spent most of his life since he's been in America, he spent most of his life in New Mexico. But he talks about doing an early interview with Bob Lazar, and they have some of the footage in that documentary. And when they visited Lazar at his supposed home, Norio's like, it didn't feel like it was lived in. It felt like it was sparsely furnished. It didn't feel real. It just felt almost like it was a set. And supposedly there were two men who were just like standing with Lazar and going everywhere he went. Like if he went to the bathroom or he went to another room, one of them went with him. And one of them was fiddling with like an electronic device. Anyways, Norio's position is that Lazar was somehow controlled. I've always been suspicious of the Lazar narrative, and I don't know Lazar at all myself, and I'm not comfortable to say whether he was himself inventing it all, if he was somehow part of a psyop, or maybe he was inadvertent. Maybe he was inadvertently telling something he thought was true. Maybe they brought him in just to show him some weird stuff and then to let him go. Because I said it last week, and I'll say it again. I don't believe if you were in the basement of Area 51, back engineering a flying saucer, that they would just let you go and not stop you. And don't forget, before he went in the media and things, he was taking people out to the black mailbox where you could supposedly sit outside of Area 51 and watch the old faithful lights fly at a certain time each night. And I don't believe for a second that he would have been allowed to just go if it was this big a secret. Yes. So like much of the whistleblowing stuff in the UFO community, and I'm talking about even the Tic Tac videos and the New York Times story and all the stuff we've seen post, 2017. I suspect a lot of this is intentionally leaked. And whether that means it's real information, which is intentionally leaked, or it's staged information, which is then pushed out, I have no way of telling.
Right, because the more misinformation they do, the better off they are, or whoever they might be. I mean, obviously, well, thank you. I'll have to check on that. The more information they put out there to keep us chasing our own tails, the better off they are. That means they can do more, right? It's not being bothered.
I mean, it's difficult to tell. All of this stuff, I think one has to approach very carefully, because so much of what the UFO community now believes about the history of UFOs and the nature of UFOs you can trace to a few things. You can trace to social movements, like obviously the fact that whatever the reality of the phenomenon, the fact that the phenomenon gets very popular after World War II and at the dawn of the space race and at the dawn of the dawn of the atomic age, it's very difficult to say, well, those cultural and scientific and political and social strains didn't affect what people were thinking. If these things were at the forefront of everybody's mind anyway, and they were, then obviously if the flying saucer phenomenon appears at the same time, there's going to be some kind of, contamination's the wrong word, but they're going to influence each other.
Yeah.
That's one way that you can see ideas about UFOs being influenced. But you can also see them being influenced by specific individuals who inject things into the narrative because they're believed or their story just hits the right point of the zeitgeist. Bob Lazar is one of those people. The Paul Benowitz affair, which I've talked to about again and again on Talking Weird over the years, and the people involved with that, including William Moore, who we talked about last week and again recently, who wrote that or co-wrote that first book about Roswell. So many of these people, so many of them were attached to military intelligence, or they were supposedly working for the military, or they were legitimately working for the military when they were saying this kind of, giving us this kind of information. So I think you have to take a lot of it with a grain of salt. And if you can trace big ideas, like if you can trace Roswell and Area 51, back engineered flying saucers and underground bases at Dulce, and you can trace all of these things which were so front and center in ufology in the 80s going into the 90s, which formed essentially what became the X-Files and that type of UFO belief. When you can look at a handful of individuals injecting these ideas into the body politic of ufology, then we have to be careful and go, hang on, if these people were so influential, if these ideas became so influential and we can only trace them to a handful of people, often the same handful of people, different ideas, then I think the UFO community or people who believe in UFOs have to really step back and say, well, how much do we know? How much of what we think about the phenomenon is based on the phenomenon, and how much is it based on people telling us what the phenomenon is?
Absolutely. The myth that becomes reality. You tell them it's often enough, it becomes real. I mean, I think that's fascinating stuff. Thank you. I mean, we don't know what's really truly. We don't know what's going on. If in fact there's intelligent life out there visiting us, if they didn't want to be seen, I don't think they would be seen. But that's my opinion. I don't know. Obviously, they don't fly in my home, so I don't know one thing or another. I just think that stuff. But I think it's absolutely fascinating. And to think that we have two objects billion miles away that we can still communicate with the Voyager probes. They can send us information. We can communicate them. They're billions and billions of miles away.
What do you think of to rewind a little to UFO groups? What are your thoughts on some of the more religious UFO organizations today? Now we're talking about intelligence shenanigans, and we're talking about cultural trends, and we're talking about all these things which impact what people think about UFOs. Do you think these groups are like creating their own mythologies, or do you think they're actually genuinely interacting with a phenomenon which is giving them misinformation, or do you think they're fronts sometimes for
I think some of them are fronts. We go back. God, I don't want to insult religions. I don't want to do that. There's some religions who can really be called still UFO cults, even without even talking about UFOs. Let's see something in the sky. That goes back to appearances of Mary, right? That's happened more than once. Even by where Mary showed up, right? And the Catholic Church investigates, and they say, well, we think this happened, we think that happened, whatever, right? They take these things very seriously. Sometimes some guy in a bar with too much booze, and they think, hey, I'm going to make a religion today. That happens too. People sold anchorages of the moon. People sold rides in a comet. I forget how much they were selling back when I went to university. I think it was $10. You could buy an anchor of the moon, and it was $10 to ride the comet. It was really low price, but people did it for a joke. But how much does it take to take the joke too far? There's Illuminati. Reverend Hen Wilson, wrote books in the Illuminati, great books too, and people ran off that idea, made it a religion. A joke religion. Some people don't understand the joke. Some people believe that joke, and then You get some people in charge and power. They're like that power, and why stop the joke? Why can't I be, Wayne Clingman, Lord of whatever? If they want to believe who I am and they want to pay me a couple bucks and maybe I get some of the skrill down here is not quite with us, okay, I'm cool with that.
Yeah, it's interesting to see modern science fiction-y beliefs become essentially new religions or new religious movements. You saw it out of the science fiction pulps of the 1940s. Obviously, that's where Dianetics, that's where Scientology comes from.
Absolutely.
And that became obviously a massive movement. And without saying anything for or against Scientology, you can see the science fiction trappings. I mean, if you look at that religion, and if you read Hubbard's even non-Dianetic books or non-Scientology books, and even if you read some of the higher level Scientology stuff, which has been leaked, there clearly is a belief in a science fiction, for lack of a better term, reality, which underpins our reality and is a more significant reality, for lack of a better term. And we also saw that with the Shaver mystery, which I talk about all the time. That almost became a similar thing. Fandom got so angry at the Shaver mystery, and the publishers got so nervous that they essentially stopped Ray Palmer from publishing the Shaver mystery anymore. And Palmer was pushing the stories by Richard Shaver that there was underground alien type beings with advanced technology manipulating the surface dwellers and kidnapping them and everything else in the lead up to the UFO era and through the early days of flying saucer belief. That thing clearly influenced early ideas about what UFOs were and what flying saucers were. And again, this comes from a science fiction background. So there's something else we've seen. We were busy before talking about military, groups, and we were talking about social and political and cultural phenomenon post World War II, including the end of World War II, including the Cold War, including the space race and the atomic age. But science fiction itself was injecting these ideas out of the realm of fiction into a belief system which impacted. If you looked at everybody who believes in Scientology and everybody who believes in UFOs, that I think you can trace a lot of it again to Ray Palmer and Richard Shaver. I'm far from the first person to suggest that. Science fiction ended up impacting real world beliefs of millions of people or aspects of science fiction. The sci-fi pulps had a massive impact on the broader culture.
Well, think what we can do now with technology, right? We can make people believe with drugs. We can make them believe anything. Given enough stress and stuff, we can do all kinds of things to people with weak minds. I mean, I know, switching the subject a little bit, I know reasonable people who actually believe that lizards are real. The lizardoid, lizard men thing is real. And they exist. Logical people with good jobs, good backgrounds, good knowledge, college graduates. I think myself, they're wackos, but that's me, right? You kind of wake in the night, you go on your way, but they actually truly believe that the lizard men out there, they need to be careful.
Well, it's funny you should bring that up. One of Palmer's biographers, Natus, who wrote the book The Man from Mars, which is again about the Shaver mystery and about Ray Palmer and about amazing stories, he suggested that the popularity of that kind of David Icke stuff about the reptoids running the world, that you could literally trace that lineage back to the Shaver mystery. So again, all these things are interconnected. Today, people might talk about lizards secretly running the world or lizard people. Back in the 1940s, people talked about the Deros secretly running the world. So, and prior to that, there was theosophical ideas about, the Mahatmas or the Grand Masters or whatever, or secret councils running the world. So these ideas that there are humanoid, perhaps better than human, or perhaps more evil than or more wicked than human in the case of the Shaver mysteries or the David Icke stuff, whether they're good forces or bad forces, or sometimes good forces fighting bad forces. It's a popular belief system, which also is a part of ufology, that there are these non-human entities impacting the way the world works.
Absolutely.
So yeah, these strains are fascinating.
I think it's because once we start losing faith and trust, We reach for something else. If we can't believe A, then we find something to replace A. We'll replace it with B, or maybe parts of B and parts of C, because we want to believe we want something. Want to have belief in something, in my opinion, something greater than us, who's going to protect us from the evil.
Yeah, and it could be that some of these things, to put aside whether they're true or not, they work allegorically as truth. They work the idea that if people feel the democratic process is so broken, for example, and maybe you can't trust either party, or parties are manipulated by, lobbyists, or are manipulated by, corporations with influence, or manipulated by whatever. Perhaps when you start talking about lizard people and reptoids or Deros, regardless of the truth of those beings, the idea that there are forces which extend beyond our democracy that impact things,
Right.
you can see why those belief systems are popular.
Absolutely.
Because people can feel disenfranchised in the system today. People can feel like it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter what you do, that there are forces above and beyond your average man that are shaping his destiny, or the average woman, and it's shaping her destiny.
If it's not going to be whomever, it's going to be the lizard men, or it's going to be the people from Mars, or the underground, the flat Earth people, the hollow Earth people coming up here and doing whatever. Right? It's not our fault. Now we have to blame these people who, thankfully, they're blaming aliens versus, say, religion. Thank God.
Yeah, and that takes us back again to, I suppose, the religiosity of aspects of UFO belief. I think it's easy to look at some fringier UFO ideas, like some of the groups that might be talked about in your book, for example, whether it's an organization like the Unarius Academy of Science, or the Adherents, or the Raelians, or, there's a bunch of them. And to go, well, these people are clearly, they've gone off the deep end. They believe in good extraterrestrials or bad extraterrestrials. But when you look at ufology itself, there mightn't be the same level of religiosity for your average person who believes in UFOs. Like, they mightn't be going out into the desert, flashing up lights and meditating to communicate with them, or thinking they're channeling extraterrestrials, or as the Etherians do, chanting and, projecting energy into batteries that the ETs direct them where to put them on the planet to, overcome cataclysms. But if there's certainly a large part of UFO belief that again believes that there are good or bad ETs that are above and beyond humanity, and acting in many of the ways that traditionally gods and devils, to get back to the title of this show, have acted.
Absolutely. I mean, there's the good, the evil, whatever that might be, right? I mean, something's going on. We just quite don't know what it is. I mean, what is it that bothered Keel at the time of the Mothman? Who tapped his phone? Who played those games with him? Why would they do such a thing? Well, why would they do that? Same thing with Mr. Valet did his research on people. I mean, they actually went to, some individuals went above and beyond to do horrible things to people. They spent a lot of money, a lot of resources. Why? It makes no sense.
Yeah, it gets muddy, but one of the reasons it gets muddy, and I think one of my favorite books, we've talked about it before, you and I don't know if we've ever talked about it on the air, but we've certainly talked about Messengers of Deception. Jacques Vallée's book from, when did it come out? Like, I don't know, 70-something, 78 maybe. Is that there seems to, or at least Vallée thought there might have been a human agency. And when we say agency, that doesn't necessarily mean one of the alphabet soup agencies that we all are familiar with, the three-letter, title of. But there could be some human force which takes advantage and shapes the belief system of surrounding the flying saucer enigma to impact the way that we behave sociologically. And that's, Vallée made that point in a couple books. And I think, throwing aside all the ideas that Vallée talks about elsewhere and that Keel talks about elsewhere, about this thing maybe being some type of energy that presents the way we expect it to, or to put aside the reality of some phenomenological base to actually flying saucers, I think it's important to also to look at the aspect that maybe the things we believe about flying saucers have been, or some of them have been intentionally crafted to make us think or act or behave in certain ways. And that was certainly Vallee's point. And
Oh, I
Keel
agree with
even
that.
talked about the phenomenon itself doing that to change our behavior. Like in some, and Vallee probably did to a degree as well, but Keel certainly thought that much like in previous religious traditions, people had been triggered to do things by their
Sure.
gods or by demons or whatever, that there was something that was still triggering people. That there was the great phonograph in the sky. He described that at some stage as sending, these messages on repeat to people down through the eras and people responding.
Oh, without a doubt, something's going on. It all depends how much you want to think the conspiracy theory of who's in charge. Is it a conspiracy of a government agency? Is it a conspiracy of an unknown people? Who knows? And this kind of thing, it's interesting to think about and debate with your friends.
That's from Aspa 60, who is either Jamie Leonardo or Aspasia, his wonderful wife, who will also do Down South Anomalies, one of my favorite shows on this network. And Jamie or Aspa says 1934 Forrest J. Ackerman at Clifton's Cafeteria from the Los Angeles Science Fantasy Society. Everyone that would become anyone in sci-fi were members. Ackerman assisted in publishing Dianetics. So it's fascinating to see this involvement with science fiction in these broader religious or occult or esoteric traditions. That's fantastic, Jamie. Thanks for pointing that out.
The whole thing, we can go back to that. We can talk about my good friend, I can't take his name, Jack Parsons.
Mm-hmm.
That was quite weird.
Yeah. Parsons and Crowley and Hubbard, they were all interconnected.
Yes. And they shared ideas and lives.
It's very strange to think that, and here's somebody who's involved in, rocket science as well, and in the space program and in all of these kind of things. So you get this strange back and forth. You get the phenomenon you get the atomic age itself influencing perhaps UFO belief, but then you get people who are rocket scientists playing around with these occult ideas as well and trying to, bring down a moon child and all. It's so strange. It's probably beyond what we could do a whole show on the whole Crowley thing.
I think it was on. I saw a couple episodes on Amazon Prime. Well, Jack Parsons.
I never saw that show. Was it good? What was it called? Something Angel or something?
Strange Angel. Yeah, I have the book too. It's interesting. I like Jack Parsons. I think he's a very, very fascinating man. His ideas, his research with LTO. Then they call LTO. Then you have LTO coming from England, the United States, and their influence in Hollywood. There's great influence in Hollywood.
Yeah, it's interesting to think today it's very popular, and we won't do politics, but it's very popular today, one theory that there's some type of secret society influence. Let's use the Illuminati as the obvious, the obvious type of term. But you see, I was only watching some documentary that popped up in my timeline on Facebook the other day, and I clicked on it. And it just showing photo after photo after photo of celebrity and politician flashing what is supposedly, secret signs, like, covering the eye or putting the hand in the jacket, or all of these things which are meant to mean something to people who are in these organizations. And the weird thing is, you see one or two of them, you go, well, whatever. But when you see when you watch hundreds of them, you're like, I don't think I've ever taken a photo where I've, put a hand over my eye or, pointed at my eye. And it's like, that is kind of weird. So then, you do have to wonder, does this belief system, and that doesn't mean there's anything real or not real, but does the belief system itself impact what people in power and people in culture, believe and subscribe to? Who knows? It gets so zany. I kind of resist going down those rabbit holes because it becomes so zany and all-consuming. Before you know it, you're building, you go into your kitchen utensil drawer, pulling out the tin foil, and you're shaping a little hat and putting it on your head out of it.
We almost have to. But it's nice. It's interesting to explore the ideas. I can sit there and explore these ideas and then spend 2-3 hours researching them, right? And not necessarily to come up with the idea what's behind it, but you don't know what you run into. This whole thing with going back to Jack Parsons, right? What was he all involved in? Since obviously the FBI knows what was going on, right? Why did they not let it continue? What were their influence with him? Did they let him do it anyway? I mean, obviously they let him do it anyway because he did it. I mean, would they tell him to do these things? Were they planted agents within these organizations and make sure they were spies?
It's difficult to see. It's difficult to start following these connections because you can definitely find legitimate connections.
Yes.
It becomes so spiderwebby and so complex that you can draw all kinds of very strange narratives. Like there's a whole culture of conspiracy in not just in America, but particularly in America. In fact, Michael Barkin, who's an academic who actually he was one of the markers of my PhD dissertation, a brilliant man. He'd probably be horrified if he heard some of my sympathies for some belief systems today, but very switched on. He wrote a book, Culture of Conspiracy, and it looks at, as other academics have looked at as well, it looks at the paranoid strain, as it's called, in American political and cultural traditions. And there has been a long tradition of finding broad conspiracies manipulating almost everything. And of course and I think Barkin goes through in his book different levels of conspiracies. Like, there might be a conspiracy that you can say, okay, that's a conspiracy that killed JFK, or this did something specifically. And then you get to a level where a lot of these Illuminati conspiracies sit. And you mentioned Robert Anton Wilson, who wrote that wonderful Illuminatus trilogy, and he wrote a number of books which were meant to be less fiction and more factual. But that type of idea, which became very popular in the 70s in the US, that there was, and it still is a very popular idea, that there's a conspiracy that almost controls everything.
There's a game called Illuminati where that goes on. That's you get to play one of the many conspiracy things, right? And who can control the most of the ones, and then you win, right? But you run into all kinds of conspiracy groups that I've never heard of. That makes it really fascinating too.
That's the Peter Jackson game. I used to play that back in college. I think there was originally a little box set you could buy, and then they had like the trading card game. Myself and my friends in college loved that game.
It's fun.
And of course, since then, people have gone back. And again, this isn't a political network, so we won't go too far down the rabbit hole here. But people have gone back to that game and pulled cards out from a game that was popular in the, mid to late 90s, and compared some of those cards to things that happened post then, and have suggested that the Illuminati card game by Peter Jackson Publishing, or whatever the game company was actually somehow predictive programming. Either that or the Illuminati themselves played the card game and thought, hey, that's a good idea.
That's right. Well, it's the same thing with The Simpsons, right? The Simpsons predict the future. I mean, it's fun. It's fun to talk about these things. It's a food for thought, something to do. Have a couple of beers with beer over pizza, right? Watch X-Files, whatever, right? The problem is when people take this stuff too far. The problem is, my opinion, is when somebody thinks, my God, he put his hand over his right eye and then he beats his horn. He must be one of them, right? That could be a problem. That's why we need to encourage people to read, to communicate with each other, research stuff, talk to one another, communicate well. So when people come up with these half-brained, half-cacked ideas, we can sit and say, no, Wayne, no, Mr. Big. The CIA is not running your lights. The CIA is not running up your water bill. Calm down now. Take your pill. We don't want to encourage people to be sane.
Yeah, it's easy to spiral with a lot of this stuff. It really is. And also, some of it is scary. Like, you look at some of it, and there are these theories about predictive programming, or theories about the revelation of the method. The idea that if these occult secret societies are going to do something, part of the spell or part of the method they have to reveal it first. So that's why you might see, according to the theory, that's why you might see on The Simpsons 5 years before it happens, it happening on The Simpsons. Or you might see encoding in a certain message. Or you might watch a particularly prescient Lone Gunman episode. Speaking of the X-Files, they had that spin-off show Lone Gunman, which seems almost to have been too cognizant of what was to come with 9/11 in the future. So again, are these things just coincidences? Are they predictive programming? Does the overarching conspiracy itself get ideas from watching these shows? Who knows? But you can go down. It's like that. It's like that Jim Carrey movie, The Number 23, which again Robert Anton Wilson had popularized The Number 23 before. You can go down this, and as what we had a wonderful comment a minute ago from Grasshopper ETAL or ETL. I probably always mispronounce it. You end up drawing red threads across the living room wall from picture to picture.
Yeah.
It's true. That's what you start doing, So
there's a movie called Minotaur, which is a low budget conspiracy theory of some crazy guy, some crazy loon in the street that these two people know disappear. They look into why did he disappear, and then become involved in the same conspiracy, and they both get killed. Right? It's a very interesting, very scary show. It's just these shows really are fascinating. Many people, I like myself, like to watch them.
Let's go literal in the last 5 minutes or so.
Okay.
Do you think does it ever cross your mind that perhaps the things that we see or think of as extraterrestrials today might really be the gods, the Elohim, the demons, the devils of old, or vice versa, which is more, the vice versa is more popular. The idea that the things of old were really extraterrestrials is obviously a much more popular theory. That's the basis of all of ancient astronaut theory, really the ancient alien show, whatever. But let's do the other one first, because it's one that interests me more. Do you think that the things, if there are genuine non-human entities or non-human intelligences presenting themselves to people still around the planet and now appearing often as extraterrestrials from elsewhere, do you think these things might be the gods and demons and the devils and the angels of our past?
Why not? I mean, obviously they're going to appear in the best way that they can appear to attain their goal, right? Is it Mary, St. Michael, is he fighting over the different fields of the First World War? Or is it some demon? Was Jack the Ripper a demon? Who knows? I have no idea. Kirk versus the Klingons. I like that. I have no idea, but I suspect that if they were actually exist, and I think that they do, they appear in a form that would most likely recognize and pay attention to them. In my opinion, for what it's worth.
Yeah, that is interesting that it presents itself in a cultural shape that makes sense.
Why appear as St. Michael, someone who may not believe in St. Michael? It's like, what the hell are you doing, bud? Or the guy not next to your door says, "Can I have a drink of water?" It's a favorite thing of the black men in black. What's going on? It goes back to my point. What's going on? Something's happening, right? Do we think about it all? Do we overthink it? I don't have a clue. I do find it interesting to talk about. I do find it interesting to read about. I do find it interesting that you do see these shows, because I find it very fascinating. All these people have different ideas that I want to learn more about. I thank you for doing this show.
Well, I thank you for coming on this show. The most important thing looking at any of this stuff, I think, is to, and I'm guilty of not following this advice. Everybody is. Everybody has their pet beliefs or their pet perspective when they look at this stuff. But I do think it's important to try to keep a genuinely open mind, to genuinely think, are there other interpretations other than the one I might be my favorite? And my favorite, I'm a contrarian, so my favorite interpretations are always something which isn't the popular one, It just is in my psychological nature.
Let's go back to my phone for a second, right? It's bouncing off my desk and stuff. Okay, I don't know what's making it bounce off, but we also have a railroad track a mile away from here. When the trains run, the house vibrates. Is my phone bouncing off my table because the train's coming down the tracks and it vibrates the table so the phone flies off? Or is it the puck? Well, when we finally gathers around, we talk about the puck, because talking about the train is kind of boring. Talking about the puck is kind of fun. Doing the beer with the tree with Olstis is nice because it helps us have that memory of our friend, right? It also scares the hell out of my neighbors, who sometimes are up to no good because they might be consuming substances that are illegal. And they see me out there in that tree, pouring that beer, saying my words I say for Tulsis. It scares them, keeps them away from me. I'm a happy camper. Same thing when I take salt twice a year. I Beltane in the winter solstice. And I draw symbols in my front yard. Scares them. It's a lot cheaper to buy that box of salt for a couple of bucks than to keep a loaded 12-gauge shotgun in my bedroom.
Well, I love that's all fascinating. But what I love most was what you were saying towards the beginning of it, is that there's a certain way we re-enchant our own worlds when we think about there maybe being a puck. And I certainly find that as a father. I find that if my daughter wants to think that there's a dinosaur living in our basement and she's excited about it, it's not like she's scared of it. It's better for her
Yeah.
the world's more exciting that there's a baby dinosaur that lives in our basement. If she wants to think that the hide behind or the splinter cat or a Bigfoot or whatever made the marks on those trees, and she's not scared, she's just genuinely wow, then feed that enchantment, because the world is humdrum enough in so many ways. And I think the great joy of all of this stuff, whether we're talking about UFOs or whether we're talking about pucks or whether we're talking about Bigfoot or whatever, is that we keep the enchantment alive in a world that is demystified so much anyway by the humdrum. So
I think it's important to keep the mystery. It's important to keep the myths and the legends alive. That being outside, I feel the sun or the birds come by. When the crows come by, I talk to the crows. I like to think I'm talking to the crow, that we having some type of communication, right? Maybe I'm a nut, maybe I'm a loon. Okay, I'm a nut, I'm a loon. I admit that. That's me, right? But does it hurt anybody? No, not a person, right? If it makes me or any,
you know what, the crows might really be communicating with you anyway. Who the devil knows?
well, plants do. I mean, plants, they now have recordings, plants making signals when there's distress, right? And they're talking to other plants, so they also release chemicals those plants can feed from and get better, right? Who knew that? I mean, not 100 years ago, back when there was a guy called Jack Parr, who was a late night TV guy on, he had a plant guy talking about that. My father at the time, a farmer, thought the guy was a loon. The guy was right. Plants do communicate with each other. We simply did not know how to hear them.
Yeah, I love how there's been recent scientific studies too of things like enormous mushroom or fungi colonies underneath the planet that somehow communicate for miles. And the world is this mysterious, wonderful, enchanted place. And I think it's better, again, that we keep it enchanted than we just,
I think the saving grace of mankind is that the world, if we would blow up the world tomorrow, I hope doesn't happen. If it did, and in a year something would come back, it'd be hard to destroy our life on Earth. If we could do a good job trying, it'd be hard, but the Earth would abide, as the famous book goes. But please, if you could, please do me the great favor, because I use the money to feed the stray cats outside my yard, right? If you could buy UFO Cults, I really would appreciate it. I think it's $3.50 Amazon.
I put a link in the show notes to your Amazon author page where people should be able to find it. But yeah, throw out a couple of URLs or a couple of book titles that you'd like people to go and look for. So obviously you said UFO Cults, Watch the Skies by Wayne
That's
Clingman.
The best one. That's a good one for the UFO type fans. If people like Mafia, my book on the Buffalo Mafia, the Buffalo Mob is a good one to start with. Yeah.
Okay.
Good books.
People should go check out your author page because there's
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate being able to plug it. Thanks a lot. The cats appreciate it too because they eat.
Well, man, it was great chatting to you anyway.
It's fun. I like talking to you, sir. We should get together sometime soon.
We should. You need to come. You need to make another film for Midwest Weird
We might be. I'm thinking about pulling the trigger about doing one on somebody called Milwaukee Phil. It was a good friend of my guy, Frank Peristori, right? Mm-hmm. They hung out together. They worked together in the Mafia.
Because you just quickly before we go to, you wrote a book on Frank Bellistrari, who
was first book,
a Milwaukee mob boss, and you also made the documentary film about
him, which is on YouTube.
Yep. What channel is it on YouTube? Or give the title of that.
Google. You can Google my name on YouTube, or you can Google Frank. Don't even ask me how to spell, let alone pronounce it, and they'll come up.
Okay, that sounds
good. Movie, I'll say this too. We made that movie for a couple of bucks, and we got our money back on YouTube. So I thank people that watched it, bought the book. All those things help a lot. They certainly do.
Well, it was a great joy to have you here, mate. Until I get to chat again to you sometime, hopefully in the very near future, and I get to see everybody else out there next week. Oh, also, actually Tuesday, of course, on Mysterious Library with Jason McLean. Please enjoy the rest of your Easter long weekend and keep it weird.
Peace out.